When we think of Stoicism, we often think of the big names: Zeno, the founder; Seneca, the power behind the throne; Epictetus, the slave-turned-sage; Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. But what if I told you there was another, a vital link in this golden chain, a man so influential that he was called the Roman Socrates, a man whose radical ideas on equality, practicality, and resilience were so powerful that the most notorious emperors of Rome tried and failed to silence him? This is the story of Musonius Rufus, the forgotten giant of Stoicism. He wrote nothing down, yet his teachings shaped an emperor's advisor and gave a disabled slave the tools to become one of history's most powerful minds. He was a man who lived his philosophy, whether in the halls of power or exiled on a barren rock. And his practical, life-changing wisdom is exactly what our chaotic modern world needs to hear. Gaius Musonius Rufus was born around 30 AD in Etruria into a respectable family of the equestrian class. He wasn't born into the highest echelons of the Roman aristocracy, but he was a man of means and education, and like many ambitious young men of his time, he came to Rome to make his mark. But Musonius wasn't interested in political power or military glory. He was drawn to philosophy, specifically to Stoicism, and in an age of rampant corruption and imperial excess, choosing to be a Stoic was not a safe academic pursuit. It was a political statement. Musonius came to prominence during the reign of the infamous Emperor Nero. This was the era of the Stoic opposition, a group of philosophers and senators who dared to criticize the emperor's tyranny and live by a code of virtue that stood in stark contrast to the palace's debauchery. Musonius was a leading figure in this movement, not through conspiracy, but through his teaching and his example. His reputation grew. He wasn't a showy orator, but a man of profound integrity. He taught that philosophy wasn't something you just talked about. It was something you did. It was a daily practice of training your mind, strengthening your character, and living in accordance with nature. For his courage, Nero exiled him in 65 AD to the barren island of Gyaros, a place described as harsh and devoid of human culture. But for Musonius, this wasn't a punishment. It was a training ground. He and his students who followed him into exile treated it as a practical course in Stoic resilience. They found water, they tilled the soil, they continued their studies. They proved that a philosopher's virtue is not dependent on his location. He would be recalled, only to be exiled again by the Emperor Vespasian. Yet through it all, his commitment to his principles never wavered. He was the living embodiment of the philosophy he taught. What made Musonius so dangerous to the emperors and so beloved by his students? It was the radical nature of his teachings. In a deeply hierarchical and patriarchal society, Musonius taught a philosophy of radical equality. His most revolutionary idea, that women should study philosophy. Listen to his words, which were stunning for the first century. Women, as well as men, have received from the gods the gift of reason. Not men alone, but women too, have a natural inclination toward virtue and the capacity for acquiring it. He argued that since women, like men, must navigate the world, they too need the tools of philosophy. They need courage to face adversity, justice to manage a household, and temperance to resist temptation. To deny them a philosophical education was to deny them the very tools they needed to live a good life. It was an argument so simple, so logical, and so completely at odds with the culture of his time. But his radicalism didn't stop there. He also bridged the gap between intellectual work and manual labor. He believed that working the land was not beneath a philosopher, but was in fact a form of philosophical practice. He said his students benefited more from seeing him demonstrate virtue through his own labor than from just listening to his lectures. For Musonius, philosophy wasn't an abstract discipline for the elite in their ivory towers. It was a practical art for everyone, a way to find meaning and virtue in the everyday business of living. So what were the core tenets of this practical philosophy? Musonius's teachings, recorded by his student Lucius, Focus on the essentials of a virtuous life. First, live simply. Musonius was a strong advocate for asceticism. He argued that we should prefer food furnished by nature, not that which requires the art of cooking. He forbade meat. He believed our clothing, our homes, and our furniture should be simple and functional, designed to meet our needs, not our desires for luxury. For what is the good of a golden couch? Is it that it makes your sleep sweeter? Not at all. Second, embrace your social duty. Unlike some philosophers who advocated withdrawal from society, Musonius saw social connection as fundamental. He championed marriage as the foundation of the city and the human race. And in a brutal society where unwanted infants were often left to die, he passionately argued against the exposure of children, calling it an unnatural and wicked custom. Third, and most importantly, practice, don't preach. Musonius believed that virtue is not learned from books, but forged through action. He famously said, "If you accomplish something good with hard work, the labor passes quickly, but the good endures. If you do something shameful in pursuit of pleasure, the pleasure passes quickly, but the shame endures." This was the philosophy he drilled into his most famous student, Epictetus. When Epictetus later taught his own students, he was channeling the spirit of Musonius, the relentless focus on practical application, on enduring hardship, and on the unwavering freedom of the rational soul. Musonius Rufus wrote nothing. Like Socrates, his legacy lives entirely through his students. Without Musonius, there is no Epictetus. And without Epictetus, there is no Marcus Aurelius as we know him. For it was Epictetus's discourses that the emperor treasured and relied upon. Musonius was the bridge. He connected the early Greek Stoics to the later Roman giants. He took the complex doctrines of Stoicism and distilled them into a powerful, practical, and accessible guide to life. His teachings are a direct challenge to our modern way of life. In an age of consumerism, he calls for simplicity. In an age of social media outrage, he calls for social duty and benevolence. In an age of endless self-help books, he calls for less reading and more doing. He asks us, is your philosophy a matter of words or a matter of action? Do you just talk the talk, or do you walk the walk, especially when it's hard? Musonius Rufus was exiled twice for the crime of living with integrity. He taught that philosophy was the only sure road to virtue, and he walked that road his entire life, through hardship and persecution. He is the Stoic role model we have forgotten, and the one we need now more than ever. His life is a testament to a powerful truth. It doesn't matter what happens to you. It matters what you do with it. You can be exiled to a barren rock and create a thriving philosophical community. You can live under the thumb of a tyrant and still be free in your own mind. That is the power of philosophy. That is the legacy of the Roman Socrates.